Hey everyone, welcome back to Sheepers Podcast. Today's guest is JD McCabe. Hi JD.
Hey, Brooke, how are you? Thank you for having me on. This is a tremendous opportunity I'm very excited about.
Thank you so much for being a guest. So, JD is the author of The Third Gift and a survivor of a vicious attack on his life by his ex-wife. So, first off, I wanted to start off with you telling your story. So,
Sure. Again, thank you very much. Yeah, the full title of the book is The Third Gift. The subtitle really tells it all. It's My Dance with the Devil and Her Mother. I'm a first-time author. My full-time job is I work in the pharmaceutical industry, but we were happily married for 17 years. I guess we can skip the happiness. Two great kids. They're now young adults. My son Billy, my daughter Katie. They're 26 and 23. But they endured, their entire high school and college careers were spent kind of going through our 4 and 5 year nightmare. But again, happily married. I think my teenage daughter at the time said it best when I found her in her closet crying. And she said to me, Daddy, what happened? You and Mom were like teenagers in love. But at the time I had no real explanation as to what was going on in the marriage. But 17, 18 years into the marriage is when she began to subtly, accuse me of infidelity. And then she would later accuse me, spiral that into drug addiction. And ultimately, 3, 4 years later, those accusations would intensify and her mother would get involved. And her mother would threaten to kill me on a beach trip. So we were on a beach trip in Topsail Beach in North Carolina, Topsail Island, and I came up from the beach one afternoon to get a drink. And she and her mother were standing at the end of a long granite counter, and her mom, looked at me dead in the eye and said, if you put your hands on my daughter, I will kill you. Perhaps you're addicted to porn, perhaps you're addicted to drugs. There's something going on with you that maybe it's something that happened in your childhood that you need to look into. So that was when really the marriage truly began to fall apart. And then in the fall of that year, the fall of 2014, I would end up spending 9 days involuntarily committed to a psychiatric facility. So I spent 9 days across 2 different facilities with a police transport in between. But I would later discover, and we could talk more about that, but I would later discover as we moved down the road towards separation and then an alimony trial, I would later discover letters in my medical records that she was writing to my physicians behind my back. So she essentially set me up for the involuntary commitment.
what?
Yeah.
Wow. Oh my
Yeah.
God.
So
So,
I know the arsenic poisoning on all the social media platforms has received all the attention, but Brooke, it was just just a tiny piece of the story. It was about, I guess, if I were to describe the whole situation in one word, it would be backward. Essentially, I would discover that everything that she was accusing me of doing, the infidelity, the drug addiction, the stealing money from our marital account, she was doing it. So everything that, again, classic gaslighting, classic narcissistic personality disorder type arrangement. Um, and that's it in a nutshell. So we ultimately ended up with, I spent 9 days in a psychiatric facility. We ended up, you know, having to walk through the medical system as I tried to figure out what was going on with me physically. When I ultimately would discover a year after we separated, I would discover that I was, chronically exposed to arsenic. And then, of course, we danced through the legal system as well. So with an alimony trial, a domestic violence trial, because she filed trumped up domestic violence charges against me once I was out of the house.
oh
The
my,
nice thing about the book, if there is a nice thing about the book, is that all of the legal stuff is in the book. So I took
mhm.
full advantage of the concept of public record and all of the audio transcripts I received, and they've been, typewritten out into the book, and they're included in there. So
Oh,
I know I just
wow.
threw a ton at you, but
No, that wow. It kind of reminds me of a Lifetime movie, except for on Lifetime they usually tell the woman's point of view and not the men's. Like a
Right.
man's story like this happening. Wow.
And that's
Oh,
one of the main, I'm glad you brought that up because it's one of the main, I mean, there are many reasons as to why I wrote the book. It's not an
mhm.
easy feat for anybody who's written a book. For those that have written more than one book, God bless you. But one of the main reasons I was strongly encouraged, not only by family and friends because of all the twists and the turns, but because of the fact that there's not enough books out there about men on the other side of the equation. I want to be clear, though, my story is not, men versus woman or
Mhm.
man versus female. It just, we're equal opportunity offenders, but there's very few books, if any, about men in abusive relationships.
Yeah. When I looked at your TikTok, it said that she, I just don't understand. Did she serve any jail time for her actions? Like, is she in trouble for her actions at all?
No, she did not. That's been a very prominent question, and rightfully so.
Mhm.
But by the time that I figured out the arsenic poisoning, so I'm certain she began poisoning me in the spring of 2014. So it was in the spring of 2014, as I previously stated, that everything really started to go a bit south, terrible. I had started working out under the advisement of my son. I used to go 250, 255 as a pretty good sized fella,
Mhm.
and started working out 3 days a week, nothing too intense. And in less than 2.5 months, I lost 70 pounds. You know, I wasn't doing any cardio. I was just lifting weights 3 hours a week. And then the physical symptoms started. So I started having tingling in my fingers and in my toes, intestinal issues, dizzy spells, difficulty swallowing. And I mean, I would see specialist after specialist to try to figure out what was going on. That poison, so I was essentially exposed to the poison, which I believe was in my protein powder. And I can explain
Mhm.
why I believe that. And it's all speculation on my part at this point because by the time I discovered it, I had been out of the home for almost a year. We had been separated. We had already started the legal proceedings, working towards mediation and then ultimately an alimony trial. Because in the
Mhm.
state of North Carolina, if there's proof of infidelity, there is no alimony. And we had solid proof that she had, stepped outside of the marriage. But it was about a year before I figured it out. So I kind of put my health issues on the back burner once we had separated and we began all the legal nightmare. And then I finally got to a liver specialist and I explained to him everything that I'd been through, all the tests that had been done.
Mhm.
And I explained to him that I had a blood test for heavy metals poisoning. And he said a blood test will only pick up acute exposure. He said, we need to do a hair and nail test on you. And that's indeed what they did. So he performed a hair and nail test and it confirmed that I had been chronically exposed to arsenic. But that was 2 or 3 months before our alimony trial. So mentally, I had already discovered so much, and we can talk about a lot of the discoveries. I had already discovered so much. I had a few people in my corner that had believed for months that she had been poisoning me, and
Mhm.
I dismissed it. So by the time I figured that out, it was kind of like it didn't really surprise me. It didn't shock me because of everything else that, when you experience so much trauma,
Mhm.
you learn it desensitizes you, is the best way to describe it. So by that time, we would later discover that she had destroyed computers, even though she was under a court order to maintain the integrity of her electronic devices. She had modified and destroyed 4 or 5 laptops because she had 4 or 5 laptops over the course of our marriage. And she also reset her phone to factory settings, or she essentially wiped her phone clean. So we had a forensics team look at all of this stuff and they couldn't find anything. And of course, we carried that into court and we had that heard by a judge. And the judge did grant that there was something negative on her phone and on her devices that
Mhm.
would be damaging to her case, but
Mhm.
she wouldn't go any further than that. The judge would not go any further than that. So I did not press charges when I discovered this because there was no proof directly linking it to her. And
Mhm.
quite frankly, I was focused on the alimony trial,
Mhm.
focused on reestablishing a relationship with my daughter, who just came back into my life after being out of my life for almost 2 years. I was also doing the best I could to hang on to, my full-time job. So
Mhm.
I kind of dismissed it. We had no physical proof linking it to her directly, so I
Mhm.
didn't press any charges against her.
Wow. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
and I was happy to be out, happy to be alive, happy to, no longer being exposed to the poison.
Yeah.
But, when I was being poisoned, she would pull the protein powder out of the cupboard and she would mock me with it. She would say, "I know you're putting something in your protein powder." And she would read the ingredients, and I'm like, "It's 100% whey protein." She would be insistent that, "I know you're putting something in your protein." And she took a newfound interest in life insurance. She took a newfound interest in our finances that she never really cared about. So there was a lot of circumstantial evidence, and certainly the change in my physical appearance, speaks for itself.
Right.
Losing that much weight, and that weight loss occurred even before the stress or the anxiety of going through a separation and a divorce causes for people. It's an instant diet program, but so yeah.
Wow. Wow. That is a lot to take in. I'm just like, wow. Oh my God.
Yeah. But I mean, I want to explain the title a little bit. So it's titled The Third Gift. The
Mhm,
first two gifts are my kids. Again, as I
mhm,
said previously, now young adults. Those are the first two gifts. And the third gift was when we went to mediation.
mhm,
So I don't know if you're familiar with mediation, but in the state of North Carolina, they like to mediate or try to settle things outside of court because the
mhm,
courtrooms are jam packed. So we made 4 attempts at that. We failed all 4 times.
oh my God.
But the third gift, at our first mediation, after they made their first offer to me, she accused me of giving her sexually transmitted herpes 2. So the
What?
third gift is actually an STD. And I didn't title the book that for any comical reason. People say herpes, the gift that keeps on giving. That
Mhm,
wasn't the reason why I titled the book that. I titled the book that because it was through that accusation that it was God's smack across the face to say, "Son, your marriage is over." Okay.
yeah.
And it opened my eyes to the fact that I started all these discoveries. And this was in July of 2015. This was, again, about a year before I discovered the arsenic poisoning or
Mhm,
confirmed it. But it was at that point that I said, "Ha, I get it. Okay, I get it. You've been out running around on me. You contracted an STD. You thought you had infected me with it, you know."
mhm,
And that's the only reason she revealed that card. But it led me to take a look at our pharmacy claims and our medical claims. I want to be clear, it wasn't medical records, but it was pharmacy claims and medical claims that I had legal access to
mhm.
because I was the primary card holder for our insurance plan. I had no idea what all I had access to, but I had access to 5 years of it. And that's
Wow.
where I discovered her hidden prescription drug addiction. I also discovered that she more than likely pretty much had every STD out there dating back
What?
to 2010, 2011. Again, being in the pharmaceutical medical field, I knew what I was looking at. If I didn't know what the
Mhm,
actual drug was or the billing codes, I simply looked it up and was able to. I built spreadsheets trying to map these prescriptions with who would have prescribed it. And again, I discovered that she had a hidden drug addiction to Adderall, Adderall XR, Ritalin LA,
wow.
benzodiazepines or downers, mood stabilizing medications. She was taking a lot of medications that I was unaware of.
Oh my God. It's like
Yeah,
she had a double life, like a
yeah,
whole different life. What
yeah. And
the?
I think so. A lot of people say, what happened? What do you think the trigger was after 17 years? What happened? Well, I think my theory is it was the death of her father. Her father, who she had been estranged from for 10 years.
Mhm,
She reconnected with her father through the innocence of our son. He said, "Hey, Mom, why don't you just reach out to Dad or to your father?" And she did. They reconnected for 5 years, and then in 2007, he had a massive heart attack. And the other piece of the story is he had come out of the closet when she was 2 years old.
mhm,
Announced that he was a homosexual. They ended up divorcing. She had
mhm.
a great relationship with her father, up until her first marriage fell apart. So when I met her, she had been married briefly to a gentleman who I never met. But she
Wow.
said, we were married less than 8 weeks. I never moved in with him. He was controlling, he was abusive. So I think the whole concept of abandonment that fuels borderline personality disorder. I think that piece was there.
Mm-hmm.
So she reconnected with her father for 5 years. When she had to make that difficult decision to terminate his life,
Mm-hmm.
I know it crushed her. And I think that's what pushed her towards medications, hidden prescription drug addiction. She was looking to fill a void. And I believe that, guilt was a toxic emotion that kind of just completely changed who she is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that was kind of the tipping point, but I wouldn't have had any of this clarity,
Mm-hmm.
that this allegation that she made against me about giving her herpes 2
Mm-hmm.
just opened my mind to so many things and so many discoveries, and it emotionally set me free, enabled me to reestablish my identity as to who I was as a man, who I was as a father, because all that was lost in the summer of 2014 when I'm being verbally assaulted, not knowing I was being poisoned at the time, but I'm being verbally assaulted by her and her mother, and essentially being made to feel like, you're just nothing but a piece of crap. So
Yeah.
the mistake I made, for anybody that's gone through it, the mistake I made is I kept myself on an island. I isolated myself. I come from a very large family, had a large friend network, had a large professional network, but I reached out to nobody. I told nobody what was going on. It was not until I was admitted to, the psychiatric facility that two of my brothers came to town and, got involved with the whole situation. So I'm certainly thankful for that, and thankful for the fact that I finally opened up to somebody. But it was
Yeah.
being on that island that is perfect for someone that likes to manipulate, someone that's a gaslighter. They want to wall you off from your family and your friends. They want to isolate you, and damn near cost me my life. So for
Man.
anybody going through anything, I would say find a friend, family member, a confidant,
Mm-hmm.
religious personnel, support center, whatever, to just have a objective voice out there that can tell you to tell you everything that you're being told, is necessarily not accurate. So, yeah.
So you don't think her mom had a large role to play in everything? Like when you mentioned her earlier, like she sounded like she was pretty crazy too. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, she absolutely played a role. And the crazy thing is, Brooke, I love them both dearly. And I never had
mhm.
a crossword with her mother in 23 years. We never had an argument. We'd
Wow.
vacation together. I'd welcome her into my home. She'd welcome us into her home. Our kids had a wonderful relationship with her, and she just turned on me like a cobra. But now, in hindsight, I believe that she probably had some deep mental issues herself,
Mhm.
or she really saw who her daughter was and knew the truth about the first marriage,
Mhm.
and just said, look, I've got to do everything I can to ensure that my daughter, gets through this financially. So yeah, she was willing to take the stand and say whatever she needed to say against me, even though there was no evidence or no facts to back any of it up. So yeah,
Wow.
she turned on me like a cobra, but I rest her soul. She passed away in 2018 at a
Mhm.
reasonably young age. She was 74, 75.
Mhm.
Um, so what, we'll never know. But when she threatened my life,
Mhm.
her brother, my ex-wife's brother, was there on the trip with her. And if in fact she was afraid of me and she was scared that I was going to harm her, I'm not sure why I never heard from her brother. Even on
Wow.
that beach trip, he never came to me to say, hey, look, my sister has said this and this and this.
Mhm.
Never heard from him. The mom did all the talking, and, never came to me to really say, hey, what's truly going on? So
Mhm.
whenever I would try to tell her some things that were concerning to me, that I
Mhm.
thought her daughter had some issues, her only response to me was, you two need to separate. That was it.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. But she turned on me like a cobra, and never looked back. So
I
yeah,
do have a oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead. I was just gonna say she became quite vicious for sure.
Oh my God. I do have a question. You don't have to answer it if you don't want to, but how did your kids take everything? Like, how do they feel about everything? Like, have they spoken to you about it?
Yeah, I mean, I'll absolutely answer that question. So, one of my favorite chapters in the book is chapter 19. It's called "Hi, Daddy." When my
Mhm,
daughter came back into my life, so I lived in the home for about a year, but I didn't have a relationship with my daughter. She was 15, going on 16, and mom started to get in her ear about
mhm,
dad being a drug addict, dad being an alcoholic, dad being, having some anger issues and mood issues. And of course, at that age, after having spent 9 days in a psych facility, as a kid, you're probably going, well, all right, well, dad was just in a psychiatric hospital. Maybe there's something really wrong with him. So my
mhm,
relationship with her was limited. But in the spring of 2016, she was living with mom, and she was old enough. I thank God every day for a lot of things, but I thank God my kids were not 8 and 9 years old at the time, that they were heading towards, late teens, early adulthood, that they could make up their minds for themselves.
mhm,
But she came home from high school, and mom couldn't walk, mom couldn't talk. There was dog food all over the floor. She ended up having to take mom to an emergency room for another stroke like event. And I say stroke like in quotations because she never had a stroke, but she was in withdrawal. So
mhm,
I had moved out of the house, and once I just made the discoveries I made in her pharmacy claims and medical claims, I still had
mhm,
access to them until we divorced. So I watched them like a hawk. She was looking for work, so she had to get off the pills to pass a drug
mhm,
test, and she was in withdrawal. As soon as she found a little part-time job, though, she was right back on the pills. So my daughter witnessed that and sent me a text a few days later and said she wanted to see me. We reconnected, and then a week later, she moved in with me, and
mhm,
never looked back. But they, at the time all of this was going on, I never told them about the herpes accusations, even though I would later find out that prior to me testing negative, my ex-wife went to the kids and said, "Hey, I've got undeniable proof that your father cheated on me. Your father gave me herpes." And I was like, I didn't know what herpes was at 50, let alone my kids at 15, 16, and 19 knowing what it was.
mhm,
So they knew bits and pieces of it, but they didn't know the whole thing. So when I wrote the book, started writing the book,
mhm,
I got their consent, and then they have since both read the book. And so they know the full story now. They knew bits and pieces of it because I was kind of forced, excuse me, I was kind of forced to provide my daughter proof once she moved in with me,
mhm,
because she had a lot of questions. She had a lot of doubts, and she would open up a little bit and say, well, when I was living with mom, mom told me that you were in the psych facility because you were suffering from depression and you were doing drugs, that you denied doing drugs, but you tested positive for drugs. Well, I had 3 very thorough drug tests, one before I went in, when I
mhm,
was in, and then when I
mhm.
came out, and I tested negative for everything.
Yeah.
So she would perpetuate her lies.
Mhm,
So they know the full story now. They really don't have a relationship with mom. She moved away 12 hours away when Katie, my daughter, was a senior in high school. She didn't go to her high school graduation. She has
mhm,
since missed 4 years of her college, didn't go to her college graduation. So they don't really have a relationship, with their mother. Um, yeah, and they've forgiven her. They're willing to have a relationship, but they also recognize where she's at, meaning
mhm.
just mentally, she's fried herself. She's fried herself with the abuse of these prescription medications for sure. Yeah. So
Yeah.
she'll text with my daughter every now and then, but my son has had no communication with her in well over a year because typical, like most folks do that have either borderline or narcissistic personality disorder, they once you're out of the picture, they begin attacking the next one closest to them. And so she began attacking my son, attacking his integrity and questioning everything he was doing,
Mhm,
and she'll never own any of this. She'll never own any of it at all. So he's like, Dad, I said, I told the kids, I said, I'll always support whatever you want to do with your mom. Recognize your relationship may be superficial at best, but if you want to have a relationship with mom, I fully support it. And he's like, no, I can't. At this point, I can't, Dad. I just need peace. And I said, I understand that. So they are fully aware of the book, the contents of the book,
mhm.
and they supported me writing it and releasing it. And, here
Wow.
we are. Yeah.
My.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there any other chapters in the book you want to talk about? Like, yeah, there's a lot to
Yeah,
take.
I mean, yeah. So I mean, there were some other twists and turns. You know, one of the main reasons why I ultimately ended up going to get tested for the arsenic poisoning is once she made the accusation against me, we got a private investigator involved. Turns out they did some pretty shitty private investigative work. They thought they had identified who the male was that she was running around with. It would later turn out that it wasn't a guy. It was our former neighbor's wife's phone. And
Um,
I would also discover that my ex-wife, her name was on their Time Warner Cable home phone line dating back to 2011. So
what?
we never figured that out because Time Warner Cable leaned on cable privacy laws and said, you want further information, you're going to need a court order. Well, at this point, we were very close to trial. We had discovered that she destroyed her phone. So she destroyed evidence. And we also had an STD expert that decisively said she has herpes 1 and herpes 2, and she didn't get either one of them from you. I mean, I ultimately would have 3 negative herpes tests. So by the grace of God, I don't have herpes. I don't have any STD. Let's be clear about that. Because
Yeah.
I've been tested for them all. HIV, Hep C, Hep B, you name it. I've been tested for them all. But it was when we thought we had identified who the guy was. His background was he had a PhD in organic chemistry. So that's when I got a little bit concerned to say, he might have the wherewithal to either get her the arsenic or some type of poison or instruct her on how to do it. But it turns out, again, it wasn't this gentleman. It was our former neighbor's wife, who we had been friends with, not real good friends, but our 2 daughters grew up together and were best friends through 8th grade.
What? Wow.
Yeah. So we never figured that out. And so some of the posts on social media, folks misinterpreted it and thought she was involved somehow in the poisoning piece. Well, she might have been, but I don't think that she was. But what I think she was involved with, and it's great to speculate when you don't know for sure, but I think her and my ex-wife were running around our old neighborhood. So there were a lot of women in that neighborhood that it was kind of like Peyton Place, if you will, that they would, run around and do their own thing. So I think they were up to no good for sure, but we will never know. And I will never know who all she was running around with, who they might have been. And I'll never know. There's certain things I won't know, but I've got 90% clarity, and that's good enough for me. And so, we've got DNA evidence that she, in fact, has a sexually transmitted disease that she didn't get from me. And one of the things that I struggle with even to this day, Brooke, is just how evil that is. How evil that is. You're out, forget the arsenic for a minute, right? You're out running around on me, but yet for some reason you want to reveal that and you want to try to pin that on me. So her story was perfect. Okay. He's controlling. He's abusive. She built the same story she did for her first husband. That was her mantra. And her mother would echo that from the stand too. He's controlling. He's abusive. She's not the same with family and friends as she was when they were dating, and none of it was true. But yeah, how perfect. He's controlling. He's abusive. He has mental health issues. Yeah, he spent 9 days in a psychiatric facility, and she wanted the icing on the cake would have been, by the way, he cheated on me and gave me herpes. It was perfect. So, I mean, when I call it a gift, it truly is a gift. I mean, God absolutely intervened and delivered me from evil. He absolutely did, because had I tested positive or had she not revealed that, I don't know where I'd be today. Emotionally, mentally, I might still be thinking that the demise of our marriage was my fault.
Yeah.
And I was never inappropriate with any other women. I never cheated on her. I wasn't an alcoholic. I wasn't any of the things that she accused me of doing. But yeah, she was able to spin me into a corner to where you start questioning everything about you, about yourself, and about your identity. So I don't know where I'd be today without that. And had I tested positive, I don't even know who my kids would believe. Who would my kids have believed? Like, well, wait a minute, Dad spent 9 days in a psych facility. Not sure if he gave it to Mom or Mom gave it to him. I don't know what to believe. And I certainly, I wouldn't have discovered the drug addiction. I would not have discovered the truth. So it
Wow.
truly, truly is a gift. Yeah. So
Yeah.
there's some twists and turns in there, but the book, I want to be clear that the book is not all dark though. It's about faith. It's about family. It's about friends.
Mhm.
It's about really kind of facing adversity and ultimately trying to turn pain into purpose,
Mhm. So
Um,
how are you healing now? Like after all of that happened, how are you healing now? Like, is it hard for you to trust somebody? Like when you get into another relationship, like how are you coping?
that is a great question. So yes, I am in a relationship now, been in a relationship. So we were divorced in 2016. We finished
Mhm.
up legally in 2018.
Mhm.
And I entered into a relationship probably in 2019 or whatever, but I was introduced to a wonderful lady through a longtime friend.
Mhm.
So we've been off and on for 2 years, but things are very good now. We're doing a long distance relationship. For
Mhm.
me, I needed to move out of North Carolina. I needed a change of scenery. So I moved down to the Charleston area, and she's been extremely, supportive of that. But there
Mhm.
were some stops and starts on my end. And I'll be
Mhm.
clear about that. When the book came out and I was dealing with something, I had a little flashback, a little bit of PTSD when the book came out. When I was writing the book, you've got to reopen every
Yes.
box that you've tucked away, right?
Yeah.
And so I would have, I'd have some issues mentally, and got to the point where I said, you know what, maybe I'm just better off on my own,
Mhm.
rather than having to deal with this. But I've learned to trust again, learned to love again,
Mhm.
and it's a fantastic relationship, and she's a very good woman. But the PTSD for me were flashbacks to the psychiatric facility. But they
Oh.
weren't, yeah, they weren't flashbacks about me and my concerns for my safety. But I was in there with a lot of young kids that had checked themselves in there voluntarily because they had legitimately tried to take their own lives, and they would,
Yeah.
you can only stare at the walls so long. So you begin to talk to people and learn their stories a little bit. And they were despondent, like, I'm not getting any help. And they're
Mhm.
sending me home tomorrow. And
Yeah.
I still want to kill myself. And
Like
so,
last year. That reminds me of last year. On my birthday, I tried to commit suicide, so I was in a psychiatric help. I mean,
wow, wow,
like,
okay.
yeah. So yeah, you do, and being in there,
How are you doing today mentally? How are you?
I'm way better. I am way, way, way better. So much better. So yeah, yeah. It does make you go crazy in there when you're in the psychiatric. And I tried to tell my mom that I'm like it makes you think of stuff. So I was
Yeah,
like, I gotta get out of here. But
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Well, how long were you in there, if you don't mind me asking?
On and off all of last year. So
Okay,
yeah. I was in there about 8 times because I tried to kill myself 8 times. So I kept going to the hospital. So
but you're good
yeah.
now.
Oh yeah, I'm good now. I'm good now.
All right,
Great now.
you promised me that.
Yeah, I swear I'm good now.
Okay. Well, thank you for your vulnerability to share your story. But yeah, I mean, the nightmares that I would have is that these young kids would show up on my porch, in the middle of the night with guns to their head, and I wouldn't know what to do. So I had some things that I had to, continue to work through, and I'm good now too. But and then, so it's just all of that people wonder why the arsenic is, that I minimize the arsenic, but it's because there was so, by the time I discovered it, I'd been in a psych facility. I'd been manipulated out of the house. I was living out of a hotel. I was living out of my car. I was alienated from my daughter. I had
Wow.
domestic violence charges filed against me. I had civil summons filed against me. Had to maintain, a full-time job, and
Mhm.
just I was dealing with legal grenades every other day. And so yeah, so the arsenic for me was kind of like, doesn't really surprise me. But I do
But
thank her. I do thank her for the weight loss. So I have been able to keep the weight.
yeah. Well, you telling your story, it just makes me think of how the legal system treats men. And I'm just like, well, I don't think they're really on men's side when people are always like women rights, feminism and stuff, but I don't think men really have like help when it comes to legal stuff like that.
Yeah, and the other gap that I'm finding out there too, Brooke, and I appreciate you saying that. The other gap I'm finding is there's really no support groups for men. that are going through these types of things. But I think part of it too is in fact that men, like I made the same mistake. Let's not call it pride, but you think, oh, we'll fix it. I'll fix it. But for me, I had to figure out what the hell was going on first. I didn't understand what was happening in our marriage, where these accusations were coming from. I thought the accusations were due to her autoimmune disease. So she allegedly, and I say allegedly, had an autoimmune disease for 16, 17 years of our marriage. Well, what would we discover when we subpoenaed her medical records and when she take the stand? She doesn't have one.
Wow.
So she had been evaluated by some very prominent academic med centers in North Carolina and then some prominent clinics down in the Florida area. I never ever asked to see her medical records. I just assumed that, you know, whatever she's telling me has to be legit, that she's got an autoimmune disease, and I'd go with her to see specialist after specialist. And unbeknownst to me, she's taking all sorts of medications that could cause her cardiac issues and could cause her bowel issues. But I didn't know that she was taking them because I never looked. I never looked at our stuff. You know, I trusted her blindly. But that was one of the other big revelations at our alimony trial is that, yeah, this particular clinic, we had the medical records. They were read aloud, certain parts of them, that she doesn't have an autoimmune disease. It's all, you know, they didn't say it's all in her head, but they said she doesn't have one. And if she has one, it's a very, very minor form of an autoimmune disease. So people think she's never been treated by a competent therapist, because her therapist at the time testified twice against me. Although I only met this woman once for 30 to 40 minutes, but yet she testified at our domestic violence trial that I was putting cameras in the doorbells. I had hacked the routers. I was cutting phone lines. I was living in the crawl space. I mean, just crazy delusional paranoia stuff, which I would later discover is fueled by, you know, abuse of amphetamines. You know, can cause paranoia, can cause delusions. So it certainly causes cardiac issues. But so she's never been officially diagnosed, but my therapist, who was very competent, and our daughter's therapist at the time, are convinced that she has borderline personality disorder plus Munchausen's, which is now known as, you know, factitious disorder. And they believe that the arsenic piece is probably Munchausen's by proxy, that she wanted me to be sick. And she enjoyed the journey of me going to see an oncologist and a rheumatologist and a neurologist to try to figure out why some of my blood work is way off. So I had white blood cell counts that were elevated. I had several other enzymes that were way off. I was evaluated and I was evaluated for leukemia. I evaluated for Parkinson's and early onset of Lou Gehrig's disease, you name it. And they couldn't figure out what the hell was actually going on with me until we discovered the chronic exposure to arsenic. So I had a woman that had closeted her mental health issues for 16, 17 years. And then a traumatic life event like losing her father and having to make that decision to terminate his life pushed her over the edge. And then you add in a explosive, combustible mix of psychiatric medications that she didn't need, that she was taking, and completely altered her brain chemistry.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
But I also want to highlight that there's laughter in the book. It's about faith. It's about family. It's about friends. It's about how I leaned on the church and I leaned on prayer. And it's about a lot of blessings along the way too. So that's how I got through it, was to recognize that in spite of all the madness that I was going through, folks that I would engage with, and you'd hear other people's stories, and hearing your brief part of your story tonight, and the pain and the adversity you've endured, you go, I don't think I have it so bad. Let me physically count my blessings. Let me write down my blessings and what I actually have that others don't. So we lose sight of that. But yeah, it was a hell of a ride for sure. Happy to be on the other side of it now. And it's been certainly been educational to learn about the publishing business. And I recorded my own audiobook, so I narrated that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I've got an audiobook out there, an ebook, and then a hardcover and a paperback version will be coming soon. But the support I've received on Instagram and TikTok and the other social media platforms has been, absolutely, humbling to me. So.
Do you have the book with you right now? Can you show our listeners?
Sure. Yeah. Can you see that? How's that view?
Yeah, that's good.
That great?
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's called The Third Gift: My Dance with the Devil and Her Mother.
Wow.
And
I
I
want to
know
thank you.
I knew I threw a lot at you, but
Yeah.
I didn't cover everything that's in the book. The other thing I want to highlight is that, again, I took full advantage of the whole concept of the public record and the actual testimony and the audio transcripts. I got the audio transcripts for the various trials, and for me, that's some of them. So a lot of folks have weighed in that was their favorite part of the book to read was that. But there's also heartwarming letters in there from my kids when they came back into my life, and the book is as real and as raw as I could get. I changed the names and I changed a few locations. Not because I'm worried about legal stuff, but I wanted to protect the privacy of my kids, and also I wanted to protect the privacy of the many, many people that kind of got pulled into our nightmare. But here we are on the other side of it now. So.
Wow. That's a lot. I want to thank you so much. Thank you so much, JD, for coming on my podcast today.
You're absolutely welcome. It was a privilege, and I didn't mean to spray you down, but
No, it was good. Wow.
Yeah,
I'm glad you're safe.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure to meet you. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
You have a great day.
All right, you too. Thank you, Brooke. See you.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey, everyone. I want to thank you all so much for listening to my interview with JB. So, if you would like to purchase his book, it's called The Third Gift, and then it's more, but I just had the third gift. So, if you want to purchase his book, I've linked it below. It is The Third Gift. It is thirdgift.com, and you can just go on there and purchase his book. I want to thank you all so much for listening to my podcast, and thank you all for supporting. You all have a great day and make great choices.